I turned the screen toward the audience and calmly said, "These rules? I wrote them. And now they will prove that Karen has been deceiving you all along." She turned pale, and the residents began whispering indignantly. Karen lost her power in seconds. But what happened next was the real final blow. Let's start from the very beginning. Maple Heights was not just a residential complex. It was an exclusive, gated club of sorts, where everything operated under strict rules. Hanging laundry on balconies was forbidden, leaving shoes outside the door was unacceptable, and as for parking, any violation was immediately met with a fine. That's why, when the HOA board was looking for a lawyer to draft the bylaws a few years ago, they turned to me. As a corporate law specialist, I agreed to help. I believed the document should protect the residents' interests, not become a tool for pressure and absurdity. I made sure to cover everything: a clear system of fines, the ability to appeal them, and homeowners' rights. At the time, I never imagined that one day these very rules would save me from outright injustice. That evening, I parked my car in my designated spot, as always. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to get to my apartment, take a shower, and drift off into well-earned sleep. But the next morning, an unpleasant surprise awaited me. Inside my mailbox, I found an official letter from the HOA. A thick white envelope with the association's logo, standard formal font. Everything looked official and, at first glance, legal. I tore it open, scanned the text, and felt a chill run down my spine. "You have violated parking regulations by occupying a space designated for guests. According to HOA policy, this violation incurs a $500 fine. If the fine is not paid within 48 hours, your vehicle will be towed." $500? For what? At the bottom was a signature. Clear, confident, unquestionable. Karen Miller, HOA President. I shoved my chair back, walked to the window, and looked down. My car was parked exactly where it should be, in my personal parking spot, the one I paid a hefty annual fee for. A mistake? Unlikely. I had known Karen for a long time. She was the textbook definition of a bureaucrat drunk on power. She loved rules, but even more than that, she loved the feeling of absolute control. Under her leadership, the HOA had turned into a miniature dictatorship. Residents were fined for the smallest infractions, and any attempt to challenge them was met with a dry, "Rules are rules." I picked up my phone and dialed her number. "Karen, this is ridiculous. I didn't break any rules." Her voice on the other end was cold, slightly condescending. "Rules are rules, James. If you'd like to argue, bring it up at the board meeting tomorrow." I smirked. This was going to be an interesting meeting. The HOA conference room was small but designed with an air of importance. Strict leather chairs, a long oval table, and a glass wall overlooking the perfectly manicured courtyard. This was Karen's domain. She sat at the head of the table, confident, composed, leaning slightly forward as if ready to tear apart anyone who dared challenge her. Her perfectly styled hair didn't move an inch as she cast a cold glance at me. In front of her lay a folder of documents, and on the table sat a laptop connected to a large screen. Everything looked painfully official. "James, you violated the rules." Her voice was soft but carried an unmistakable threat. "Here are the photos of your car in a guest spot." The screen lit up, displaying an image. My car parked by the curb. I narrowed my eyes. Something was off. The most important detail was missing: the sign with my parking space number. It was just a car against a gray curb. I crossed my arms and, keeping my voice calm, asked, "Where's the proof that this isn't my spot?" Karen raised an eyebrow slightly, but her tone remained icy. "We are not required to provide that. It's your responsibility to prove otherwise." A murmur spread through the room. Residents exchanged glances, whispered among themselves. Someone shifted nervously in their chair. This was all too familiar. Karen had imposed fines without solid proof more than once. I let the silence hang, allowing the room to absorb the sheer absurdity of the moment. Then I smirked. This is ridiculous. Who even wrote these stupid rules? Karen straightened, a flicker of disdain crossing her face. They were drafted by top legal professionals. You wouldn't understand. I couldn't help it. I laughed, loudly. Karen frowned. The room fell into a tense silence. I lifted my gaze and locked eyes with her. They were written by a professional, Karen. By me. The air grew heavy, charged like a storm about to break. Karen froze. The room went still, and in that moment, I knew she had lost. Karen froze. For a fleeting second, shock flickered across her face, but she was a seasoned player. In just a heartbeat, her expression hardened again, confident and unshaken, as if nothing had happened. That doesn't matter. You violated... No, Karen, it matters a great deal. I didn't even let her finish. I turned my laptop toward the room and clicked on a file I had kept in my archives ever since I wrote these damn rules. The screen lit up with the official HOA bylaws, registered with City Hall years ago. I scrolled slowly through the document until I reached the exact section I needed. Then I turned to Karen. In the rules that I personally wrote, Section 4.3 states, "Parking spaces owned by residents cannot be subject to fines unless there is an official court ruling." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Here, take a look." I zoomed in on the text. Karen swallowed hard. I didn't take my eyes off her. It's written in black and white. If someone owns a parking space, no one, not even the HOA, has the right to fine them without a court order. The crowd stirred. Whispers spread like wildfire, growing louder, swelling into a wave of unrest. "But the rules can be changed," Karen blurted out, her voice tense, laced with forced confidence. I shook my head. "Yes, they can, but you never changed them officially. And now, you've been caught manipulating the system." Her face tightened. Her fingers clenched around her pen so hard that her knuckles turned white. I clicked again and pulled up another document. "Here are all the fines you've issued over the past year. Most of them? Illegal. This is fraud." The crowd erupted. "You stole our money!" someone shouted from the back row. "We demand answers!" Another voice called out, and soon the room was filled with angry cries. Karen turned pale. She was trying to keep her composure, but her lips had pressed into a thin line, and her gaze darted nervously around the room. She understood. Her world was collapsing. A week later, the residents gathered in the same room where Karen had once ruled unchallenged. But now, the atmosphere was different. No one feared her judgmental glare anymore. No one sat stiffly in their chair, afraid to speak. For the first time in a long while, people felt power in their own hands. The vote was quick. A unanimous decision. Karen Miller was removed as HOA president. When her name was announced in the final verdict, she didn't even argue. She simply pressed her lips together, lifted her chin, and walked out of the room in silence. But it didn't end there. My report on her schemes reached far higher than she had expected. A financial audit uncovered dozens of illegal fines, HOA budget manipulations, and even money transfers to fraudulent accounts. Karen was held administratively accountable. She could have gotten away with just a fine. But how ironic that now she was the one being fined. I had no intention of becoming the new HOA president. But after witnessing how easily the system could be turned against them, the residents came to me. "James, you know how these rules work. You wrote them. You're the only one we can trust." And once again, a unanimous vote. That's how I became the new president of the HOA. At the very first meeting, I introduced the most important change to the bylaws. All fines must be issued with solid evidence, and HOA decisions can be challenged without fear of retaliation. No one could ever exploit the rules for personal gain again. Now the HOA worked for the residents, not against them. A few weeks later, I saw her. Karen stood near the building entrance, packing her belongings into cardboard boxes. The same person who once felt untouchable was now leaving the building alone. I walked closer. She noticed me, and for a brief moment, hatred flashed in her eyes. But I just smiled and, looking her straight in the eye, said, "Rules are rules, Karen. Now you wouldn't understand." She said nothing, just pressed her lips together, turned away, and carried her box to the car. I watched her go. And for the first time in a long while, peace returned to Maple Heights.